is, I'll keep reading and see if I can figure it out. I'm just killing an hour before my bus, substitute for the train, goes to Scojan centers of Europe. This was used in the presentation to the EU in 2008. Perhaps somehow trying to show that Slovenia was part of the EU. A couple of questions. First, is it possible that there is far more graffiti as you move westward from, let's say, Moldova? And number two, is it more colorful? And if those answers are true, is it because as you move further westward, you've got a better economy and more money that kids are willing to squander? To walk along here, you may be able to hear occasional clunk. That's because these are squares of cement sitting on top of what I am pretty sure is a raceway. Maybe not for water as much as for electrical lines for the railroad. But notice the absolute analogy to the Roman sewer system. Very large birdhouses. Not sure what kind of a bird it would be for. Maybe a wood duck or something? I don't know. There's a new in a park area that's unmown, unkempt, and for all appearances somewhat abandoned. I picked up off the sidewalk about 45 minutes ago and put up here so a person coming back to look for it will find it. But what it illustrates is if you don't have something connected to you. It is a spinach pastry, but in the design of a burek. And a burek is the traditional dish in all of this Eastern Central Europe, if you will, and probably further on down in the Balkans. And what it is like an intestinal tube wrapped up that inside contains various stuff. If it's burek, then it's a mixture of minced meat and other spices, and that's their tradition. In this case, there is spinach in there, a spinach mix with something else perhaps. And you can also get them with cheese and a couple others. It's not bad. The outside's quite flaky, the inside quite doughy. Add the time, not to mention the initiative, to graffiti-ize that entire side of that engine. We're complete slackers on the rest of it. Scojan Cave, and this is the overview before we go on the tour. There are two tours. I'm going to take the first one, the classic one, and if I want to, I can take a second one, which is a new cave system that I think goes along the line that suggests that there's a disappearing river, that the river goes into the ground, blah blah blah. And it looks like another cave right there. Come in and see what's inside there. And particularly this water that's coming out down here. Whether that's man-made or whether that's coming out of the ground naturally is a good question. Tell me where I am right now. I don't think. It says the Adriatic Sea here. Here's the underground river. These are the cave systems I'm going to see. I'm guessing that the overhead is up in here somewhere, but I can't be sure from this map. Idea of how the system was created, the origin of the collapsed stones. In other words, the ceiling of the cave gradually collapsed and expanded upward. So let's look at each of these panels. Here's this first one, 5 million years ago, 3 million years ago. Notice collapsing here, and then here, opening it up. All this is collapsed out, opening up another river system down below, which probably reflects this line right here. And here we are here, but what's this thing? It looks like it's suspended in midair. That's the present. Standing at was named after Princess Stefani, 1864-1945. She visited here in 1885 and then donated the money to rehabilitate the forest and the landscape in the area, as well as this viewpoint just for her. This is all that you're permitted to take pictures of. Just as we about ready to leave the cave, this is dead part of the cave. There probably is where the viewpoint is. And this is where the water tumbles out of probably another cavern system. And then this is where it begins into the cavern weave. Whether it has the same kind of history or not, I don't know. So back in the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and the Neolithic or Copper Age, there's evidence of cultural existence. Age graves were discovered, as well as some, I think, other graves. It was an antiquity Christogram, a late antiquity Christogram dating to the 4th and 5th. This carved monument is, or was for, or by whom. This is the flat waterfall. Here the water continues down over another fall into this pretty pool. But notice that everything we're inside of right now has all been worn around over time by this stream bed. Magnificent chasm view. I think this is the falls we were just watching. Here is a bitch up long flights of stairs, steep. There's a visitor center, I think. But I'm taking a route here that will allow me to walk back to the train station. Scojan Nature Trail, and hopefully this is going to Scojan. Taking a right turn because there was no sign at it. Well, it was a fairly significant intersection, and unless you have a photographic memory. This is the spectacular bridge you walk over when you're crossing this huge gorge. Apparently this is the largest cave in the world. The largest you can't see here is the old stairway that people used to use. No railings, right along the face. Have an old train like this on display. It's a great way of making sure they get saved. Call it a workhorse is probably a colossal understatement. Very large walls for some purpose, but they're just sections and then they end like this. If there were a city behind it or a town, you'd think it was a sound barrier. But maybe it's for snow deflection or water deflection or something, but I've never seen anything quite like this. Notice a lot of limbs that have been knocked down. They had a really terrible ice freeze here all over this region, which is why this train stopped at the station and put on a diesel engine because the power lines for the electric train walking down this street, we're supposed to be able to see some Art Nouveau. I'm not sure if this is Art Nouveau. Smile building. Maybe the statue alone qualifies. I think somewhere the Baroque and Succession were the same or similar. This, I think, I would call Baroque. What interesting building. The problem with this is it's in cement, number one, and number two, the windows look great on the day you move in, but when you never wash them, it takes away from it. I would call Art Nouveau, and I'll get a closer, better look at this. Those pretty designs, whimsical almost, would be Art Nouveau in my mind, but maybe here it's called Baroque or Rococo. Next to it, a building with some just very simple detail, but again, I don't know how to classify this. I get confused quickly. A large park that I passed earlier when I first got here, but on the far corner there's something interesting. We'll go down on the other corner of the park looking at these two buildings. Again, these wavy, whimsical lines here. Art Nouveau, Baroque, Rococo, I don't know. Certainly a defining corner character. And the street is named after. Water fountain for this tiny plaza. It is definitely Art Nouveau. I believe this is what prompted me to come down the street. The statue of a dragon, the city mascot, if you will, or symbol, just sitting on a relatively modest obelisk for some reason in this little square with a couple of Andy Warhol. I know of the church in the back in the past, whether that's a long past or a short one, I don't know, was offended by the breasts on this naked woman on the top of the statue of President in the President, whatever it is, square. So the theory was that he planted this trees to obstruct the view of his perishers when they left. So I'll pan this now most important square for tourists at least, because it includes this three-part bridge right to my left. 1884 pivoting bridge in the center, and then added these two. A set of dramatic bronze doors, perhaps popes or cardinals that are being made idols of. The rough kind of sculpturing, except for the faces a bit. Certainly nothing like Ghiberti, which is adjoining building's entryway. Excuse for not being healthy when you live around this part of the city. So today my goal is just to pick up some of the things I didn't see or didn't video, but want to make a record. Ljubljana is a modern city, nicely kept, heavily treed. It's a very pretty place. The cities I've visited, mix of modern architecture and the old. Random shots give me a feel and you a feel in the future of what it was like here today. Residential, of course, mixed right in with Mercator, which is the shopping center, or the supermarket, if you will, of Ljubljana and of Slovenia. They're relatively small and modest, with a pretty good selection for what they are. But they're kind of like, it kind of personifies my feeling. Very nice architecture. And yet there remains, of course, always the apparently communist-like ugly buildings. Yeah, country as this appears to be, it still has its homeless. Here, of course, we're right behind the big church on the main square. We'll cross over the 3 bridges to the right there. The water feature packed on the back of this big church. A back door of the church. 7 o'clock in the morning at the big square. Quiet with no tourists yet. The castle in the background. The market's off to the left on the other side of the river. These stalls are only open on Fridays, but it appears they're also open on Saturday. Makes sense, frankly. Make a lot of money. I'd wonder they wouldn't be open. Again, a shot as it's quiet. And we'll be doing a clockwise cruise about the town, starting right here. Notice the church in the back we saw earlier when I first came here, so let's get a really pretty close-up. We have a view down that faux Greek market. The real markets that we think of are off to the right, but there are individual shops in it, and all the way down through those litter with product, of course. But here's something unique. It looks oriental. I have no idea what these are for. They look like giant oriental soup spoons, but I don't think so. At least it's novel stuff, not the usual. It's the Donna Glens of the world set up for their Saturday. I think there's a special event here today of some sort. Entire downtown area. The guidebook's very effusive, which is his job about the magnificence of these doors. I don't agree. I think that it's interesting, but compared to Ghiberti, it's just telling stories in a very obvious way if you know the stories. That's Pope Paul, I think it was, the very popular recent poll, portrays the history, religious, I think, primarily, of Slovenia, if not Ljubljana per se. One of those 3 characters is actually an American. Job to do. It's kielbasa sausage, which I kind of got to eat in a fair amount in the last couple of days, attached to it. It's the analogy to Poland's kielbasa. This was the main square. That's the town hall on the left side. This is Roba statue, which is a kind of a slight knockoff or allusion to Bernini's in Rome. I forget what the name of that square is. interesting park art, I'll call it. It's in this little alleyway. A hand whose wrist is a clown, it looks like. And here are all these little thingies. This is a drain system here, of course, in the center of it. But you wonder what this is all about. It's just like little thingies. You can see they have different faces. So they're just really faces. Look it down closely and look. Playful elegance. Perhaps in some way reflects the attitude of Slovenians. These are happy people in the American way, as they should be, because it's a wealthy country, or at least it appears to be. On the theme, you have to wonder what's going on in the mind, the creative mind of this artist. Were those flattened out versions of the other? You can see what appears to be a face, somewhat little flat turtles that continues all the way down to the river. Slouch of an effort. Notice the creativity here, a line of these things, perfect line, one sitting off as a straggler, and then here a whole pile up, like almost like an automobile crash on a freeway. Here where the water would flow under into a system, they all kind of pile up, and there's these little devices right here, which who knows what these things symbolize. Going on the street. The inelegant this is. I'm going to go back up and continue my walk on impression of the architect's columned bridge, which really is supposed to be a square bridge. In other words, a bridge that is also a square over the river. Lovely kayak paddle just for exercise, wouldn't it? How pretty it is with its willows draped out over the water and the stairways down to the water. How lovely to live in one of those places, eh? Isn't the castle? The street that emanates from the main original square. Unrestored yet somehow quaint. Old building. Certainly fits one of those three styles I'm aware of but can't differentiate. This building looks like it was restored with paint and so forth, except for these two panels bridging those old windows, or those windows which look like very old panels. Is it possible they kept what was there for nostalgia? I hope so. This other building hasn't been touched at all. Fitting one of those classic styles. I wish I had a brain that could remember three things. I was in the lower right-hand corner at that triangular square, right above my little black circle.
English.
And this new water feature and statue. Castle above us to the left. Interesting that in the midst of these restored buildings are these few older ones that aren't touched. It gives credibility to the other curious mind that wants to go beyond those doors and see the insides. Nearby is this church, which I don't think is St. James. I want to look at that statuary over there. But here's a good example of these old buildings that haven't been restored for some reason. This cute little balcony sitting on the corner so you could take in everything going on this little teeny square. So here's St. James Church, just on the other side of the buildings that surrounded that square we were just in. This has the tallest bell tower in Ljubljana. That building portion on the right was on the square, but I just didn't notice it as such. It's a bit of what we did the other day. Cross that bridge, hang a left, and go back into the old section. I'm on the other side of the river from where I was the other day. On the other side I sat and drank some water, and this is that view. These are the devices that are used, I think, for snow and ice defense. I see them on many. Or they just break up the integrity of the snow. I don't. Right where I've circled and right where that number would be looking for are these squat, broad-faced, peasant-style houses, separated by these lanes, apparently, that are not more than about one vehicle wide. Originally contained fishermen on the rivers, and they would have a secondary job called light carriers. I can't pronounce the name in Slovenia, but their extra job in the evenings was to go and accompany the wealthy from their social events back to their homes in safety. But these homes are also characterized, originally were, by long plots of home gardens, some of which we see right here, but that's what we're looking for this morning, is that ambience. Crabapple, I think. Across several backyards of garden. Strip away this modern stuff and put on the old exteriors and recognize that gardens would have gone back probably to that big. This is not novel. We've seen it all throughout Eastern. Little alleyways that they're speaking about. Just as easily refer to them as driveways. Here we can see lines of these squat little buildings, some two-story. I'm going to turn left here at Cladenza and walk down here. Because where I'm trying to get to is the old canal that used to go through this area. Here we can see these houses that have those broad-like faces. Arcaded peaks aren't indicative of those kind of houses. This modern design is very interesting in the casting design. Here we are at that canal, which is quite an interesting canal. It looks very old, at least this portion we're looking at here. Was that just an archway that carried water from that area in here? And yet there are steps. Canal dumps into the river. There's that big church, castle on the top, which incidentally in 1515 or before was rebuilt again after one of its many destructions by somebody, principally as a defense against, they say in the guidebooks, the Ottomans, but in fact it was also and primarily for, I think, the peasant revolts that were raging across Europe and had been for 2 or 3 centuries, which is reassuring to know that the populace didn't just take all of this from these kings forever. They tried to fight. I'm going to work my way back alongside this canal, bringing myself ultimately to this circle that you see that's vertical on the left-hand side, which is where the old tobacco factory was. The old houses put to another use. And this church we're approaching, we've seen the peak towers of this morning. Bridge, which I'm sure there are going to be several as I walk along. What a lovely ambience, eh? If you live nearby, restaurants, bars. This is the soul of a city, in my opinion. This kind of. This church is not highlighted anywhere in the guidebooks, I don't think, but looks to be one of the prettiest. Most of the style, probably because of the textured surface, the interesting color choices. It's white with almost a gray backdrop. Clock towers, of course, is the killer. There are these pyramid shapes around, eerily reminiscent of the architect Preshnev's pyramid on the Roman wall. Don't know which came first. We're crossing over the canal. Has a peasant house, 2-story, large. These buildings attached directly to something new, but the lovely garden may just be classic. Thinking about this canal is, instead of just erasing it in the past, it's been turned into, preserved and turned into a modern park-like benefit to the populace. In here, that was the tobacco factory, but I can't be sure. Right now is about at the bottom of that circle with a question mark on the left-hand side. I am about where the bottom of the question mark is. In fact, right about where the dot on the question. That's it. Although these buildings certainly could have been converted for some other purpose, but two things: it looks too old, and two turns me in my thinking is that it looks too big a complex. Okay, where that vertical circle is with a question mark at the bottom, I have circled tobacco, or what looks like tobacco, if you can see it. Okay, so I'm assuming that it's on that street that the original factory was. And looking at this map that's next to me, this is where I walked up, right through here. And there's the train station, track, and the station right behind me. It's actually just a stop. Okay, so I've walked down. I'm probably standing about somewhere in here. No, probably over in here somewhere maybe. And I'm going to walk over to here. This should be that street. I am on this street. Railroad tracks right behind me now. So this is the street that's blocked off. Pile of buildings that I was in. My guess is, first glance, that it was, the building would have been right on the opposite side of this barricade, since on the left side is a house, it looks like, and that it's all been this fence. You can see that most of it has been destroyed and removed and replaced by the foundations of another building, except for that building there, which curiously is allowed to exist within this new structure. Now, could it be that that was the building? Through here, and I'll try and go through, you'll see that sign says something to do with tobacco. So we'll go back inside that complex. And I came up to Trafska and whatever else it was. So now we're entering into here. And now we'll go find that. It should be right over there between those. Closer than I thought. It may have been that these old buildings we've seen that we're walking through were other industries. I'm telling us where the museum building, but this other one here. Now, whether it composed this building and that building there, restaurant. My own notes, I can't find the museum in here. It's somewhere in these two buildings, I'm guessing. But this was an industrial complex area. 19th, 1871, peaked in 1890, producing 103 million cigars per year, including those of the Imperial Court in Vienna. After World War I, the factory produced primarily cigarettes. Town within town had kindergarten, library, fire brigade, and mixed. Manufactured by female workers. Virginian cigars was the most popular early in the 20th century. And cigarettes had cult status right up to 2004, when production finally was on the outskirts of town. But by 1894, not more than 23 years later, it was in the picture. Doors are opening for me. I'm going to keep pushing until I get stopped. I know I can't get into the restaurant. I tried that door, but I can go upstairs. And since I know there's a crossover bridge, the guard got me as I got to the stairway. Dang, hate that when it happens. Anyway, he and I were not able to communicate too much with his English, but apparently right over here somewhere is a small building which is the museum. But I wasn't able to determine which of these buildings actually the little building itself was. But the picture seems to suggest a longer. So it's only open during the exhibition, whenever that is, and that's Tuesday through Fridays. Closed all the rest. Here's that I've gone about as far as I can go. Red flowers, they almost look like strawberries, but I think they're flowers. Just had an opportunity to talk to a lady who spoke English very well, and wonder of wonders, all of these buildings were part of the cigarette factory. So it was no slouch of an operation like I was thinking it was. It was big. Closed in 2004. So it wasn't that long ago we could have stood here and seen perhaps hundreds of women, and maybe men by now, coming to work. At a pub that I passed on the way up to the museum, the tobacco museum, which is up there. But just imagine when, probably if this place is very old, I mean it wouldn't have to be that much older than 2004, to have been a watering hole for people who worked at the factory. 1871, as I pan about, nothing that we're looking at was here, except for some of those buildings, which were probably added to over time. This was out on the outskirts, like many of our modern industrial parks are out on the outskirts of whatever city or town they're next to. Again, lower left where we are now, literally in the lower left corner, right under where that triple intersection is. We're going to walk up. Notice that this town is over to the right. We're going to walk up to Tivoli Park, which is right there in the whole left corner. Back to those buildings. Surprising to me how big a complex this was. Here we can scoot underneath the railroad tracks and get in. We enter into the park when we must meet first. It's a very fine park when people will come and sit for hours and hours and days and months and years. Now what does the little person there signify? Face, he's not a young person but an older man. Is it perhaps this man? Is he looking at himself, contemplating what he has spent his life doing in book? Actually, I do know why people have dogs. There are a lot of reasons. One reason that young couple may have it is maybe their substitute for children, and if they've seen that idea, good on. Spoke with at the museum, indicated that our government is very confused. The country is wonderful, the people are wonderful, but the government's very confused in unemployment, and the economy in general is not good, particularly for young. Top of the stairs, entering into what looks like a forested area, is this young boy, I think, statue, playing a flute. This is a pretty part of the park. I like parks where you can get a different sense, a different ambience, and different parts of it. I know the history of this large building. Most parks of this size exist because the wealthy, or the king usually, or something of that ilk, could control and dominate that much land for their own personal use, and did. When they were finally ousted such edifices simply became part of the public domain. Sculpture is nice in parks because it prompts some to think, to ask, what was the artist thinking? What was he trying to project or represent? And did it have anything to do with my experience here? A ballet pose? But why? Imagine being an old man sitting on this bench, being comforted by the sound of that water spilling out of that nymph's fish, and reading a book of poetry. Parentheses, read iPad, close parentheses. Dog statues that probably represented the original owner's totem or crest. Been living in a small apartment perhaps adjacent to this park, being able to wander down anytime, good weather, bad weather, catch a bus somewhere nearby into town when I felt like it, to get that change of pace. This feeling here of being inside of a forest, lovely little point of ambiance. Parasitic growth, it doesn't think that. And small bridge seems to offer an even more woodsy trail of some sort. That larger bird being mobbed by the sparrow-sized birds. Forest may be a product of that ice freeze this last winter, because there's a lot of damage around here. Whacked up a steep trail to get to this trail through terrific amount of downfall. Quite at the top, but great system of trails and roads up here for people to stay in condition and destroy their knees. But maybe the technology will be so good by the time he needs them, it'll be a no big deal. I could probably determine that the red line is in fact a trail, and that probably right now I'm outside of Tivoli Park. I don't know. But in an area called Mostek, middle road to this point, and there's a sign that says Tivoli Park that way. It says I probably have bushwhacked up through here, and obtained this part. Although and occasionally was actually on this, but the rest of the time I was bushwhacking. So I think I'll continue down this way on the assumption that it is this way, and it'll loop me back. So if you get the next phone call is from Vienna, you'll know that was this elevation on my little hike. I can see up to the mountains towards Bled. Elderly people like that lady and another couple that took off on a regular dirt trail up through there to the right, have this very large area, very nicely maintained roads, you really have to call them, but all kinds of, this relatively new. Down below that road I was following goes down where I hear lots of noise, music and so forth, which I want to avoid. So I climb back up here and I'll follow. I think what they are is ski jumps. Narrow at the top, a chute, and then it broadens out, giving you space to land. Seeing a couple of them in Slovenia of what that huge amount of force and ice must be in the way of force. One of these trees, only this one probably twice, 3 times as big in volume, with all of that limbs and branches and so forth covered with thick coat of ice, enough to shatter the Tivoli Gardens, or Tivoli Park rather. And I guess I'm off the map probably 4 or 5 inches up to the, literally to the northwest, upper left. So I'll pick up the street here, Selavoska, Cesta, or something earlier in the way of a path that'll take me back up and then drop me. Going is right where you see that long, down at the end of that street where you see number 31. That I've encountered kind of looks abandoned, but it's an interesting back of the church, although there's some considerable restoration on it. This is on my walk back along the perimeter of the... Just entered Tivoli Park again, but I can't be sure where that entrance is. But it must be northwest of the railroad tracks. I haven't crossed. I'm guessing there's an ice cream stand somewhere. Some athletic park art. It's here, and what's interesting, that's the first time I've seen there's a roller rink for kids, or playground equipment in the form of an interesting sculpture. Seen some very, very deformed people here in wheelchairs, which again is an expression of a society that makes very sure that those people have access. This is the area that I avoided coming down to when I hooked straight ahead and then to the right. So I wrapped around here a circle and come back to this point. Large park and its nearby hiking area. And I will cross under the railroad tracks and hopefully see where the train station is. This is my hostel in Ljubljana, Zeppelin Hostel. Modest little kitchen, but it works. There where people who visit here can put a little circle with their name on it where it is they come from. Notice how many come from Brazil, Australia, from Perth, New Zealand. In Malaysia, a lot of people come from Malaysia. China and Japan, principally Hong Kong and Japan. Eastern United States, Western a little bit. Mexico, reception. Back there, the rooms. This is the interior of this large building. Elegant old staircase. Entry. Now this is an entry for these apartments and so forth, which my hostel is one. And there's a corridor there, a long arched corridor, and to the right are more businesses, a restaurant and so forth, which I have actually not been in it. So today my goal is just to pick up some of the things I didn't see or didn't video, but want to make a record. Hostel room. And those are storage cabinets for bags. Because of my knees. I also try to find one that's got some kind of infrastructure here that kind of isolates. You can keep the windows open. Some people close them late at night, and then it gets hot. Like, respectful of everybody else. There'll be a crowd of people in here, and I will come in at 10 o'clock and say, well, folks, I'm going to sleep. And they'll vacate it within about 5 or 10 minutes while I brush my teeth and so forth. And I do the same for them. I creep out very, very carefully and quietly as I can.